Hello, and welcome to Chin Hairs and F Bombs Conversations with Girlfriends. I'm SallyAnn Gray, and today I'm having a conversation with my friend Lindsay. We are going to talk about an experience that we both shared and something that's really important to us, which is therapeutic ketamine for depression. If you are new to this podcast, which this is just our third episode, so you're probably new, thank you for tuning in. Thanks for listening. Let me tell you what you're getting yourself into and kind of explain what we do here. This podcast is me and a friend just shooting the shit, just talking about something that's important to us. And I always feel better after talking with a girlfriend, and I always feel more connected and less alone in this world after sharing. So, I'm trying to share that experience with you all. I hope it feels like sitting down with a couple of girlfriends, and, I hope that you enjoy it as much as I do. So let's get started. I would like to introduce Lindsay. Lindsay, hi. Can you tell us about yourself?
Sure. I am in my upper 40s. I live in Massachusetts. I have two teenage sons, and I am a therapist by training, a psychotherapist. But I closed my private practice last spring after 20 years and have been focusing on doing some freelance writing, still in the mental health field, but not seeing patients face to face.
The way that Lindsay and I met and how we know each other is we were both in a memoir writing course together. We're both working on our memoirs and we were paired up. I always call Lindsay my book buddy. So we were paired together through, I don't know, magic and similar interests, like, but
Forces of the universe, yeah.
yeah, and I'm so glad that we were. We've shared a lot together over the year that we've known each other, including our writings and our struggles with writing, and we also learned during that time that we not only struggle with depression, but that we both sought therapeutic ketamine for treatment. That is something that we have both done, and that's what we're gonna talk about today. I also wanted to take a little break here to say that we are not medical doctors, and what we're talking about today is our personal experiences with therapeutic ketamine. So please do not try this at home. If ketamine is something that you're interested in and seeking out, please be under the care of medical professionals. And Lindsay and I have been and are, so we're gonna share our experiences there. I wanted to start by talking about how we got to exploring ketamine for our depression. So,
Mm,
I can start by talking about, what got me there, and I went through 5 hard years. I I have a history of struggling with depression. I've been treated for depression since I was 16, and it is something that I've carried with me my whole life, but in 2018, things really got hard for me, and I went through a depressive episode that year, and then in 2020, I struggled with anxiety, and I was medicated for anxiety and treated for anxiety for the first time in my life in 2020, and then in 22, I was suffering from burnout and depression. And so those things all together, including some traumas that I experienced during that time and how I wasn't able to take care of myself, I was in a bad place. I was in a dark place. And in those 5 years, I was under the care of a therapist. I was under the care of a psychiatrist. I changed with the care of my psychiatrist, changed my antidepressant 6 times,
mm,
and nothing was working. So I have treatment resistant depression. And so I was looking for answers, and I had tried so many different things: talk therapy, medication, meditation. I talked about this a lot in episode 2 about depression. So many things, and nothing was making a big enough dent for me to be able to live my life fully. My therapist at the time, my current therapist, had been through some training and experiences with therapeutic ketamine for depression. So she introduced me to the concept and kinda informed me more about it, and I did my own research, and then I was connected with a psychiatrist in Maine, which is where I live, who does therapeutic ketamine for depression. That's part of her practice. And so I explored this as another treatment for my depression because things were not going well. So that's how I got there. I took, like, 6 months to consider if this was the right thing for me, because not only was it, a type of treatment I had never tried before. Psychedelic treatment was not something I had ever tried before. Also, this was an investment of time and money. And so I really had to think about, did I have the resources financially, emotionally, support-wise to take this on? So I did a lot of considering and thinking, and that's how I got to my yes. Lindsay, will you tell us about how you got there?
Yeah, I will try to make it as, you know, quick and neat as possible, as quick and neat as depression can be. So I remember being depressed probably starting when I was in elementary school. And nobody knew why. I mean, it manifested mostly behaviorally, tantrums, crying fits, school refusal, things like that. Nobody could understand why I was depressed. I grew up in this upper middle class family. I did well in school, right? Like, there were no problems. I've since discovered that there actually were quite a few problems happening behind the scenes that I was potentially reacting to. They were problems that weren't talked about, but that, I obviously could sense. My parents were having some marital struggles and having their own mental health issues. Um,
Mhm,
but so I didn't really get treatment for my depression until it morphed into an eating disorder in
mhm,
high school and early college. And then the depression got much worse. And then that was when I started therapy, both individual and group, and started antidepressants at that time. And over the years since then, so that was like when I was 18, so like past 30 years, yeah, I've been on and off probably a dozen, antidepressant medications, because my experience has been that, it will work for a time
mhm.
and then it won't be working. And so then they'll add another antidepressant at one point. And then when I got pregnant, I actually did a consult at Mass General to see kind of, you know, what my options were as far as taking medication while pregnant, what were the risks.
Yeah.
And so then that also required a tweak because one of the medications that I was on, was less safe or had been less well studied.
Mm,
And so, yeah, just over the years, various tweaks have had to happen. And I would say things really reached a crescendo probably in 2020 or so. My mother passed away from Alzheimer's disease, and that coincided with a global pandemic and also some perimenopausal stuff for me where there were huge hormonal changes. And so I went from, being able to function pretty well to really not functioning well at all.
mhm.
Everything was an enormous effort, and I was consumed with, really negative, hopeless kinds of thoughts and feelings. And so I actually don't remember whether my psychiatrist had brought up the ketamine or if it was something that I had researched. I know she had brought up ECT. And so I wonder if maybe in the process of researching that, McLean Hospital here in Massachusetts, it's the same clinic for ECT, ketamine, and now they do TMS too, the transcranial magnetic stimulation.
Yeah.
Um,
What is ECT? I don't know
well,
that
ECT,
one.
electroconvulsive therapy. So they put you under anesthesia and they deliver a electrical shock to your brain,
Mhm,
and that has actually been found to be quite helpful for people with depression and bipolar.
mhm.
But so in the process of kind of researching the options, I discovered that they were doing the therapeutic ketamine. And so we talked about that, my psychiatrist and I set up a consult with McLean. And I mean, basically, I sort of felt like, so wait, like, what are the what are the drawbacks? Like, 'cause, I'm so used to being like, what are the side effects? Okay, like, all right, so I
Yeah.
might gain weight and I might have dry mouth or whatever.
Mhm.
And basically, they're being like, yeah, there really aren't any. What? And then they're, like, "And how many treatments will it take?" And they're like, "Yeah, some people have 8 treatments and then they just never come back because 'cause they're just, like,
Mhm,
basically cured." And I was like,
mhm.
"Why wouldn't I do this?" Right?
Yeah,
And I recognize that I am in a place of extreme privilege because, 1, my insurance covered it, so all
wow.
I owed was a copay each time I went.
That's
And
amazing.
yeah.
Mhm.
And 2, my husband was able to, have some flexibility at work to drive me to and from,
Yep.
because of course you can't drive immediately afterwards.
Mhm.
And now they've altered their protocol a little bit, and you are able to take an Uber home if you can't get a
Yeah.
ride from, someone you know. But in
Mhm.
the beginning, you had to be with, a responsible adult that you were acquainted with. So that was kind of my journey
Yeah.
toward or that ended in the therapeutic ketamine, yeah.
So I also was looking at TMS, for
Mhm.
depression. I evaluated it when I was looking at the ketamine as well and ended on the ketamine. I'm a bit of a square, and so I was nervous about doing a psychedelic treatment. I was like, "Oh, man, what if I have a bad trip?" Like, I was nervous about it, but luckily, I never did have a bad trip, and I'll talk about that when we talk about our experiences.
My understanding, in terms of comparing the psychedelics is that, quote unquote bad trip is less likely with ketamine. You can sort of have these dissociative experiences, which are uncomfortable, right? Where you feel like you're kind of separated from your body, but the others, like the psilocybin, the MDMA, are more likely to maybe have some really upsetting hallucinations,
Mhm.
kind of tap into some unresolved trauma, repressed memories.
Well, in the way that we have done therapeutic ketamine, there are a lot of safety measures in place so that we don't have those bad experiences.
Right.
So in my case, I always had like what other people might call a sober sitter. I had my therapist in the room when I
Mm,
was doing my therapeutic ketamine, and so I knew that I had someone there to help me and make me feel more safe. I also had the experience before I did the treatments. I talked with a friend of mine who had done a single ketamine experience under the care of a psychiatrist, and she found it hugely helpful, a single treatment.
wow.
She had been grieving deeply over the loss of her mother, and a lot of complicated grief and pain was going on for her, and she was struggling with, a really dark time in her life, and she did 1 treatment with ketamine, and it made a lasting impact, and I got to have a conversation with her about that when I was in my, like, deciding phase.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I just went in blind. I was like, "All right, hook me up."
You're braver than me, I'm a scaredy cat.
Well, I don't know if it was bravery or desperation, frankly,
Oh,
but
I know what
like,
you mean.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I
So,
I have said that I felt like I was out of other options.
mm,
I had tried everything else and was still miserable and, like you said, unable to operate in my life,
yeah.
struggling so bad, and it was impacting my family and my work. and my relationships and my marriage. And so it was totally like throw spaghetti against the wall. What's going to stick? Like, sure, sign me up. Let's do this because I am desperate.
Yeah, yeah.
So I would love to talk about our protocol. So
Mhm.
something that I like about Lindsay and I, we have done our ketamine a little differently. So I have done ketamine two different ways. One is with a troche, which is another word for a lozenge. That's an oral administration of the medication. I have also done the IM, that's intramuscular, ketamine, so that is a shot in your arm. Those are the 2 different ways that I've taken the medication. The troche is not for everyone. It's intense, man, and by intense, I mean you put this lozenge in your mouth, and then you swish it around without swallowing for 15 minutes.
Mm.
It is not easy, and 15 minutes feels way longer than you think 15 minutes is,
Yeah.
and I got really good at it. You learn how to get good at it, but it is,
Does it taste terrible or is it like, you know,
oh, you know what's so cute?
like a edible?
I got to pick the flavor. I picked grape
Oh,
flavor. So it kinda tasted like good cough medicine, like, that
okay.
was not a problem. So I've taken the medicine 2 different ways. The protocol leading up to it was always, have a light meal, I think 3 hours before the experience. Maybe it was more than that, but you want to have a fairly empty stomach when you go in. So I would have a light meal and I would have something to drink, but I would cut off my liquid intake and my food intake so that when you're in the experience itself, you don't have to get up and like go to the bathroom because you
Mm.
might be disoriented, you might, have some trouble with balance, and they don't want you to have a fall. So,
Yes.
would make sure not to have a big meal in advance, make sure not to drink my weight in water in advance, and then I would go to my session, and I would bring my comfy cozies, so I always wore comfy clothes, no buttons, all elastic waist. I would bring my coziest blanket so that I could put that on, and I would bring, like, a crystal or something, that I selected, and I had blackout shades that I would wear so that it really kind of becomes a sensory deprivation, and you can really feel the experience without, experiencing the world around you, right?
Yeah.
And then I would make sure to pee right before, taking the medication, and then would get comfy, with the lozenge, would swish it around for 15 minutes, and I would have wonderful calming music playing in the room or in headphones. I found some psychedelic playlists,
Mm.
right? And, like, John Hopkins has a psychedelic playlist, I think, that they it's, like, scientifically for that sort of experience, and so I would have my scientifically weird music. For me, the experience, if it was the intramuscular, that is a quick trip. I would be feeling interesting within 5 minutes, and it would be over within 60 minutes. With the lozenge, it would be more like 90 minutes before I
Mm.
would start to land, is kind of what they
Mm.
called it. And then afterwards, my favorite thing about, like, the safety protocol and, like, things that I had to sign, documents I had to sign about what I would not do, and one of them was definitely, they say you cannot operate a vehicle the whole day after you have this experience. My favorite one, though, was you cannot make any big
Mm.
decisions.
Mhm.
Oh my god, that one made me laugh so hard. I'm like, I mean, good advice, but, like, very specific.
Right, right. Well, and don't think that I didn't use that, right? Like, "What are we having for dinner?" Like, I'm not allowed to make any big decisions, so you're gonna have to figure it out."
Nice,
So
good one. And then the rest of the day, you just take it easy, right? So, my husband would always drive me home, and I would maybe journal, and I would go to bed early, and I would drink my water, and the other part of the process for me was I would see my therapist the next day for a integration session. So, the neuroplasticity of the ketamine experience is the highest in the 24 to 48 hours afterwards. And so my therapist and I would have a intense session. It would often be a 90-minute session the day after my ketamine, and we would process trauma. And some of the ways that we did that was EMDR and internal family systems. We would use those 2 methods to focus on a stuck trauma and try to process it and get it out of my body. And with EMDR, you're able to more easily handle some really hard things that your
Mhm.
body might be pretty resistant to dealing with. And so we would use that period, that window, to try to get some shit taken care of.
Yeah.
I really appreciated that time with her. So I did 5 Mondays in January of 2023. So each Monday of that month, I would go in for my ketamine treatment, and then on Tuesday, I would have that intense therapy session and rinse and repeat 5 times that month. And that was, pretty intense, it was pretty concentrated,
Mhm.
and it was really, really helpful for me.
Mm.
Lindsay, will you tell us how you took the medication and what your protocol and process was?
Yeah. So gave me a choice between IV ketamine and the nasal spray. But since the insurance was willing to cover it either way, and since the IV is generally more potent, has a more potent antidepressant effect, I decided to do the IV. So I went into McLean Hospital and, they set you up. There's a nurse in the room the entire time. And they're monitoring your vital signs, your blood pressure, your oxygen saturation. Initially, I had the things called on your chest too, sort of like an EKG kind of
Mhm,
situation. They didn't continue that, so I think after a certain amount of time, knowing that like it wasn't going to cause my heart rate to go crazy or whatever,
mhm,
they didn't have to do that anymore. And the treatment itself would take about 45 minutes. I have a playlist that I made, and usually by, I would say, the second or third song, so, maybe 10 minutes in, I start to feel the effects, which at first just feels kind of like you're being swaddled in a warm blanket and just like, that relaxing feeling. So 45 minutes, and then they kinda let you lie there a little bit and, come out a bit, and then there's a recovery room, put me in a wheelchair, and because I couldn't walk safely, take me down to the recovery room, give you a snack, some tea if you want, and you wait there, and they're kind of observing you for usually another hour or so. So usually the whole process would, from the time I arrived to the time I left would be like 2 to 2.5 hours.
mhm,
And then I would drive home and, yeah, similar instructions, driving, no big decisions, nothing too strenuous,
mhm,
just really take it easy. And I would often notice that I was, I don't know, a little pensive, I guess, or
mhm.
maybe even somber, the day of, I guess, yeah, just feeling a little melancholy sometimes even. But then, that would wear off by the next day, and, I would definitely be feeling much better, and sometimes, like, I remember a few times having the experience of getting the ketamine and, like, literally feeling like a weight had been lifted off my chest afterwards,
Oh,
right, So the first phase is 8 sessions over 4 weeks, so twice a week for
wow.
4 weeks, and then they do a few taper sessions, so, like, I had 3 taper sessions where they maybe spread them out, like, one week, 1, 2 weeks later, something like that. And then they kind of left it up to me that, just call if and when you start to feel depressed and, we can schedule a booster session. And unfortunately, what I've found with the booster sessions, I know we're going to talk a little bit about that later, but it's kind of hard to predict, right? So the first time after I'd had my first 11, it was like a very slow slide, and I tend to be kind of stoic anyway, and I was just kind of like, it's fine. It's
Mm,
fine." Right?
mhm,
And then I think it was like, so I started having them in April of 2023. No, wait, 2022, somewhere around there. And I think it was like that fall that then, I finally called and scheduled them. And then when I had the first one or two, I was like, oh, right. Like, this is
mhm,
how I'm supposed to be feeling, right? It's not supposed to be a monumental task to empty the dishwasher, right? I'm not supposed to feel like hiding from the world,
mhm,
just kind of all of those things. But that's been the biggest challenge for me, is just trying to figure out when to schedule. Like, I don't know, like, am I depressed? Am I
mhm.
depressed enough? Because I've also had the experience of like kind of falling off the cliff, right? Where
Yes.
it's like all of a sudden you're super depressed and,
Yeah.
curled up in your bed crying. And then it's almost like, yeah, how soon can you get me in? And then
Mhm.
sometimes they can't get you in right away. And
Right,
so it's just,
right.
that the timing is tricky. But
Yeah, I'm going through that too. So I did my intense, like, integrated sessions, and then after that, we started using booster sessions, and it's a question of how often do you need to go?
Mhm.
Because I get my boosters at my psychiatrist's office, and you can't go tomorrow,
Right.
for a bunch of reasons. She's not available tomorrow, I'm not available tomorrow, my husband's not available tomorrow. There is some planning that goes into that, and so I've had to figure out, like, 5 months in between boosters is too long for me,
Mhm.
and, so now I'm trying 3 months between boosters, and maybe 4 months is the right amount, I'm not sure. We're learning together,
Mhm.
and I have seen a great help from those boosters. I was immediately better,
Mhm.
when I did my intensive first 5 sessions. I was, but there was some rebound. Life gets in the way, shit happens,
Mhm.
and the boosters have helped me stay well and stabilized.
Mhm.
So you mentioned I would love to talk about any experiences you can remember while being under the medication. So I
Yeah.
love that you said it feels like did you say a warm hug?
Like a warm blanket, right? And you're just
Mhm.
sort, or like when you get in a warm bath and you're maybe like really tired because you've been skiing all day or something, right? And just
Mhm.
that feeling of like kind of melting into it.
Yeah,
That's usually what I first notice. And then, I mean, it's so hard to put into words really, but
I agree.
just this immense feeling of well-being, first of all, and a lot of, like, connectedness. Like, I'm often having these thoughts, like, everything's connected, like, I'm connected to everyone, and they're connected to me,
Yep.
um, and just feeling like, yeah, everything's gonna be okay, and being able to really see the beauty in things
Yeah.
to the extent that I can put it into words. That is what it feels like, right? Is sort of putting on these immensely, like, rose-colored sparkly glasses where you're just like, you know, there's beauty out there, and I'm
Mm.
okay, and, you know, yeah, people love me, and I love them, and
Yeah, being able to see things that are true, but you weren't able to see them when you're depressed.
mhm,
I said in my 2nd episode, depression lies.
mhm,
And tells us that we're unlovable, that nobody wants to be around us, and that we don't add anything to this world.
and it
And
always stuns me because even if you can recognize that, like, oh, this is the depression, right? Like, I know this thought. I've had it before. I know where it comes from.
Yeah,
It just still feels so true,
I know.
that it's like, I don't know. I mean, it's sort of like if you were being held underwater, right? And you couldn't breathe, and somebody was like, "Don't worry, like you'll eventually breathe again." It's like, well, yeah, but I'm still
But
suffocating,
I'm
right? Like get
drowning right
down,
now.
drowning right now.
Mhm.
But it's amazing how, like, even 24 hours, later, I can think the exact opposite thing, right? And go from like, yeah, I'm a piece of shit and I don't have anything to offer the world and my life is over to like, I think I'm going to do this and that. And like,
Mhm.
I can't wait for the next phase of my life or whatever.
Which is miraculous.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I often talk about this big gap between what you know. I know people love me. I know I'm a good person, and then what you believe. And depression puts those really far from each other between what you know and what you believe. And that was one of the intentions that I brought into some of my ketamine experiences, and I ended up having a vision around these 2 concepts of what I know and what I believe, and building a bridge
Mm,
between these, with there's this deep valley in between these mountains, and it was really important to me. It
mhm,
really made an impact for me. And that was one of the things that my therapist encouraged me to do going into the treatments was have an intention.
mhm,
And I would, but I also it was very loose because you do not know what's going to happen in your ketamine experience. You cannot guide it. You can't tell it where to go. You have to be open. And I think you have to be open overall just to do this, right? You have to be open to, I don't know what this is going to be. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how I'm going to feel. I am okay with that unknowing. And I'm going to go into it with an open mind and an open heart, hope for the best.
mhm,
I journaled a lot when I journal a lot, period. And I journaled a lot during that 5 Mondays in January. And I reviewed that before I had this conversation with you, and one of the most amazing things that happened to me in my very first session, my very first ketamine experience, I had, for the first time in my life, no running monologue in my head. My brain was silent for the first time in my life.
Well, it's supposed to shut down that default network of, yeah, thought stream, right?
You're
Teleprompter.
right. Yes, the default neural network.
Yeah.
Yes. And that was so loud. It was so loud, and it was only negative things. And it shut the hell up in that first session, and I was blown over by that silence, and it was wonderful. And I agree with your assessment of it was very comforting when I was in the experiences. I felt really connected to nature. I felt connected to the universe.
Mm,
And that's often where I went, was the universe. And there were times that I felt like, you know, I and earth are small, and not in a scary, I'm insignificant way, but in a, this shit doesn't actually matter. The small shit doesn't
mm,
actually matter, but it does all feed into the big picture, and that does matter.
mm,
And that gave me some perspective that I didn't have. And I really enjoyed when I felt like I was part of the universe. And one of the most fun things that I remember from a ketamine experience, and, you know, this was just luck, like, not everyone's gonna get this, but I was light, and I was dancing in the universe.
aw.
It was amazing. It felt so wonderful. I felt so full of love and light
But you
and
were like
energy.
you were embodied light, not
I
like
was.
you were
Right.
lightweight. Yeah, yeah.
No, right, I was embodied light, yes, that's what I was. I was energy,
Mm,
which I do believe that,
Mhm.
this bodily form that we have is temporary, but I do believe in the energy that we all have and how that impacts the whole world. So that was I really liked when I was dancing in the universe, that was
Yeah.
fun. And the only time that some people with ketamine talk about K-hole or K-holing, and that is that idea of a bad trip.
Oh, okay.
Um, and so some people, especially if they don't follow all these safety protocols and if they're not under the care of a medical professional, if they're doing this recreationally, can fall into a K-hole. And I was afraid of that. I've been in a fight with my brain like my whole life, and I was afraid my brain would fight me
Mhm.
and take me to a bad place. And the only time that I started being scared when I was under the ketamine, my therapist was there, and I was saying over and over, "Am I okay? Am I okay? Am I okay?" And I meant that in a lot of different ways.
Mhm.
And we had already agreed on this. She put a hand on my shoulder and she said, "Sally, you are here. I am here with you, and you are okay."
Mhm.
And that took me out of a fear that had appeared, which,
Mhm.
that's part of the human experience is fear.
Yeah.
But it put me back in a grounded place, in a safe place, and I was able to go on my journey without any more fear. And one time I had an experience that was dark, but
Mhm.
I wasn't scared,
Mhm.
and I knew what it meant. I was looking up at this black wall. It reminded me of Inception, and it was this huge you look up and all you can see is this black wall in front of you, and I knew that that was the world, that was pain and hardness, and I knew that I didn't have to partake in it,
Mhm.
and that I didn't have to be a part of that. And that was it was a good thing. It was
Mhm.
hard and it was good, and a lot of these things that we do are hard and good.
Well, that sums up life in a nutshell, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
truly. So I want to talk a little bit about how we felt afterwards,
Mhm.
how you felt immediately after, how you felt a little bit after, a lot after. So something really, really helpful that my therapist had me do before I did the treatments, she had me fill out two questionnaires. And the really standard questionnaires, one is for anxiety, it's the GAD-7, and so it's just 7 questions about, like, how full of anxiety you are and how much it's impacting your life. How often do you feel nervous, anxious, on edge? Are you not able to control or stop worrying? And so I took this quiz and had my results, and I took one for depression as well. That one's the PHQ-9. It's 9 questions. And so I took these to set a baseline before the treatments to help me understand, is this making any difference, this ketamine? Because I was going to then take the quiz again after my 5 Mondays in January. And the results were shocking. So my depression score in just 30 days went down 77%.
Wow.
Yeah. My anxiety score went down 44%.
Wow.
And by February, I was able to cut back my antidepressant medication. We cut it in half, and I was able to cut back how often I was seeing my therapist
Mm.
because I was doing so much better.
Yeah.
And that was the most impactful therapy I've ever had, you
Yeah.
know?
Mhm.
I've tried a lot of different things. I've never had anything work that fast and that well. And a nerdy thing about me, I keep taking this quiz every month. And so I'm such a nerd. I have a spreadsheet. One of my best friends calls me Spreadsheet Sally. So I have a spreadsheet and I track my scores for my depression, for my anxiety to help give me a quantitative measure and
Mm,
help me see how am I doing? Because it can be really hard to look back over a year and be like, "Hey, how were you last year?" It's like, "Oh,
right.
I don't fucking know." It was a lot of days.
Yeah.
And so I've continued this practice of taking this quiz every month and seeing where I'm at, and I'm not depressed anymore. Yay! So I and this has been through the initial ketamine experiences and then figuring out and dialing in my boosters and everything else that I do for my wellness.
Yeah.
So ketamine changed my life.
Yeah. Absolutely.
How about you? How were you able to see changes and impact in your life?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's often this study of opposites, right? Going from I want to hide from the world, nobody likes me, I don't want to be around anybody, to chit chatting with people at the gym, right? Having a little interaction with someone at the coffee shop.
Yeah.
I notice things like music. When
Mm.
I'm depressed, it annoys me. I don't care if it could be my favorite song in the whole world. I don't want to listen to it. I turn off the radio. And then I get ketamine and I'm, bopping around in the car singing along.
Wow.
The ability to, experience joy from things.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know if you have this experience, but like it would almost be like when I was depressed, something that would normally give me joy would hurt physically because I be like, I should be able to enjoy that. Or like I should be able to enjoy that it's a beautiful day. But
Mm.
instead, like, inside it's like dark and rainy. So, being able to just experience life's little pleasures and joys, and much fewer self-critical thoughts. I mean, I've had thoughts in the past couple years that I would never have had previously, in terms of just, yeah, feeling like I'm a decent person and that people, actually maybe really do like me and that I have things to offer the world. And then on the flip side, not caring so much about things that I used to, be so consumed with and being like, why did I ever, this is really silly, but like I used to feel, like, really guilty if, like, I got books from the library and then, like, didn't read them, and I was like,
Oh,
I can't even finish a book in, like, the 3-week loan period, like, what's wrong with me?" And then I'd be like, "Well, I guess I could take it out again," but then I was like, "Oh, but the librarians are gonna be like, 'What is her problem? She keeps' and I'm like, it's so irrational and so delusional, but, it's, like, things like that where I would, yeah, just criticize myself about everything and feel like everyone else was criticizing me too, and, like, people really aren't paying that much attention to you.
totally.
Um, and now feeling like, "That was really dumb." Like, I don't I don't know why I even gave, a moment's thought to that at all. So, yeah, it's things like that. And they have us do, whenever I go into McLean, I fill out a series of questionnaires. The PHQ-9 is there, the GAD-7 is there, and there's a few other ones like monitoring sleep and appetite and things
Mm.
like that.
Mhm.
And yeah, I can definitely tell when my scores are higher, when they are lower, but I've found that it's these other things like how hard is it to
Mm.
get through the day? How much energy is required, right? Yeah. Do I want to hide from people?
Mhm.
How does music sound? Is it annoying? Am I feeling hopeful about the future or am I feeling like there's nothing there?
Yeah.
Those are kind of the warning signs for me of like, yeah, it might be time to go in for a booster.
Yeah. So I noticed my smile loosened up. So after the ketamine, I finally was able to smile.
Mm,
And my son was on a hockey team. And I was isolating myself and shutting myself down so much. I didn't know any of the parents on the team. And after the ketamine, I poked my head out of my turtle shell, and I'm sure they were like, "What the fuck? Like, this woman has ignored us for months, and who is this?" And I'm like, "New Sal, who this?"
mm,
Like,
mhm.
yeah, my smile loosened up. I was able to talk with people. I'm much better at texting. So when I'm in a bad place, I'm a terrible texter.
Mm.
I don't know how to respond to people. I I ghost everyone in my phone, and I can text people now, and I can smile at the neighbor and have a conversation in the grocery store line and
Mhm.
just be a part of the world more.
Yeah. Feel like a human
Yes.
being. I
Yes.
remember also being so blown away, like, this is why non-depressed people get so much done. Like, oh my god, it's so much easier,
So much
right?
easier. Yes.
And that being like a big awakening for me of like, oh my god, yeah, like
Yeah,
I
so
would
then
definitely get so much more done if I, wasn't having to talk myself like up and get psyched up and then do it and then feel exhausted afterwards.
yes, and only once I had the capacity back, I was like, "Oh my god.
Mhm,
Of course everything was harder. I have this before and after, right? I
mhm,
know what it's like to be well, and I know what it's like to be really low." And I didn't have the capacity, but I was beating myself up, and I
mhm.
was like, "Everybody else can do this. You're a
Right.
failure.
What's wrong with
Why
you?
can't you do it?" Yeah, I quit social media because I hated the comparison that comes with that, and social media, typically people are only showing the good parts,
Mhm,
and I didn't need that in front of my face. I didn't need to see how easy and beautiful things were for everybody else when it wasn't
mhm.
for me. It was really painful.
There's a book by a psychologist friend of mine called The Extraordinary Gift of Being Ordinary. And a lot of it is about like these comparisons we make, with others and how we're always trying to kind of, yeah, where do I measure up? Right. And
Mhm.
kind of reach for the next level of achievement or whatever,
Yeah,
particular category. But there's a piece where he goes into, what people post on social media versus what they Google. Because I guess you can look and see like, what are the most common Google inquiries,
totally.
right? And so on
Mhm.
social media, it's like, my partner is my best friend and I love him, her, they so much, right? I'm so glad to be on this life journey with you. And then Google, it's like, why do I want to kill my husband? Or, it's it is it bad if my partner is driving me crazy? Just yeah, like
Oh,
why is my partner being a jerk?
mhm.
How,
Divorce lawyers.
right, divorce lawyers, exactly. How to get a divorce in the state of Massachusetts,
Yeah,
so that's
yeah,
what's
and
really going on.
that falseness wasn't helping me. It wasn't helping
It
me
would
at
just be
all.
nice if there was some balance, right? I mean, I'm not
Mhm.
saying that there aren't, moments and relationships where, yeah, things are going well, but like it's not like that all the time and it's not like that for everyone. And so just having some balance of like,
Yeah,
yeah, and today I'm finding it hard to get out of my bed, but
right.
yesterday, I had a great day and I hiked up that mountain, remember? But
Yeah,
yeah, that's not what gets
yeah.
shown. So,
One of my greatest compliments when I meet someone is to say, "They're really real."
mm,
And I heard myself saying this over and over, like, after I moved to Maine and was meeting a lot of new people. And I was like, "What does that mean, Sally?"
mhm,
And it's that idea that people can show all parts of them, not just the best parts, that they can share their struggles and the places where they don't feel as strong either.
mhm.
And that's what I'm drawn to in people and friends is when someone is real. That's
Right. Not afraid to admit that, like,
yeah.
yeah, I fed my children goldfish for dinner last night. Oh,
Yes.
well,
Yep.
like
Yep. And I'm like, "Oh, cool. We can be friends."
some nights are like that.
Yeah.
Go
Cereal
for
for
dinner.
dinner. Lindsay, you were at a conference about therapeutic ketamine. I think that's so cool. Is there anything you want to share about your learnings there?
Yeah, I mean, so it's interesting, a lot of what the presenter shared about, kind of common experiences are things that we've touched on, the feeling of connectedness. He talked a bit about MDMA as a treatment for trauma, which is showing a great deal of promise. And he thinks it'll be authorized sometime this year. but that, people who've, essentially never had a supportive relationship, right? Have an attachment disorder, had an abusive history, they do an MDMA session. They're like, oh, is this the feeling of love and connectedness that like everyone talks about? Because like
Wow.
I had no idea what that was, you know?
Wow.
So that was really interesting. And then there was definitely a lot of talk about, okay, so people are seeking out these experiences, but, save for a few states and maybe a few counties or cities,
Mm,
some of them are not fully legal yet.
mhm.
And it's very variable in terms of what you're gonna get, right? If you just seek
Yeah,
out like a shaman or, somebody who the way he described it was like, people will get, kind of give themselves a psychedelic experience, right?
right.
Get some mushrooms or whatever, and then be like, this was so life changing. I want to give it to other people and basically just kind of ordain themselves and be like, I'll
Mm.
be your guide. But like they don't have any, clinical training or
Well,
professional
and
training.
you don't know about the purity of
Oh,
the medication or the dosage or what's right for you. Yeah, a lot of kind of safety issues there.
yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so, he was kind of saying, proceed with caution. And, if 'cause it was a conference for therapists, right? So if your patient expressed interest in this, approach it from a place of harm reduction, like, okay, so how can we help you have the safest experience possible, given that it's still not legal in certain states for certain issues in certain contexts, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
So
cool. Were people excited about it? Are therapists excited about it?
I think excited, but also nervous,
Mhm.
right? There were some questions about addiction and, are there any contraindications for people who have addictions? The presenter's stance was essentially there's no risk of like physical dependence,
Mhm.
the way that there would be with, alcohol or some other drugs. Unlikely that people are going to get quote unquote addicted to like MDMA or psilocybin for the reasons that we mentioned before, that like sometimes it can be a really pleasant experience, but other times it can be really hard and you're unsurfacing these experiences and emotions that maybe have been repressed for a long time, and that's part of the process and that's why it's ultimately going to be helpful, but the experience in and of itself is not one that you'd be like, yeah, I can't wait to do that again.
Mm.
And as he said that ketamine tends to be people tend to report that that as being more consistently pleasant, in light of Matthew Perry's recent death, right? I mean, I think there is the potential for abuse and people have died from overdosing. So that I think, you want to proceed with a lot of caution, I think in all cases.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is the part where I would like to share a story. I like to share a story related to the topic. So, welcome to Story Time with your gal pal Sal. So, after my ketamine experiences, I was also curious about magic mushrooms, shrooms, psilocybin, whatever you call it. I have had friends who have used that in different types of settings for journeys, for spiritual journeys. And so I wanted to give it a try myself last summer. And so I've watched some documentaries, I've done research, and I know set and setting is important. And
Yes.
so I had my mindset correct, I had my mindset in a good place, and so I felt great about that. And I set up my setting, and so I cleaned my whole house because I hate visual chaos and I wanted only to see pretty things. And I had no children in the house. They were at sleepaway camp, and I wasn't gonna be interrupted by them or their mess or any other interruptions. I set up the whole day. I was so excited. I had my journal out, I had incense, I had a book of poetry, and I had my acrylic paints so I could create, and I had some special crystals, and I had them, like, aligned for my chakras, and I had tarot cards, and I had sage, and I had set up a little station in the backyard so I could be in nature. I was ready. I had my mindset and my setting ready, and I took the mushrooms and waited patiently. I was listening to some psychedelic music and waited and waited and waited, and nothing happened. I was so disappointed, and I looked around me, and it looked like I had a failed seance. Like, I was trying to commune with, like, another entity, and it didn't work out for me.
Yeah.
So,
Now, do you know, like, the dose you took? Was it, like, the normal dose, a micro dose?
it was not a microdose. I was
Yeah,
trying to take a heroic dose.
yeah.
I was trying to have an experience. I weighed out the psilocybin, like, I'm a nerd, like, I tried to do it the right way, and so I was pretty surprised, like, 2 hours later, I was like, "Okay, so this is not happening
Yeah,
today."
yeah. I mean, I certainly think these things affect everyone differently, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like I've heard that I mean, it's similar to, like, pot, right? Like, it depending on the batch you get or whatever, right?
Mhm.
That, like, it can be a totally different experience, and maybe it's kind of like a dud batch or who knows what, you know?
Yeah.
But at the conference, I talked a little bit about the microdosing, and I
Mhm.
guess they've done some studies where they, I mean, it's been like double blind, controlled placebo study where, half the people get the psilocybin and half get this like placebo powder that they
Mhm.
ingest. And both, of course, report having, heightened senses and feeling more connected to things. And
Yeah.
um, so, I mean, according to those studies, it seems like the microdose, you might as well just like, have some sugar and, but, um, but have someone tell you that it's psilocybin. That was his stance on the microdosing that like,
Yeah.
not really sure it does much, but
I can see that. I mean, I spent 2 hours going, "Is it happening? Is it happening?" It wasn't happening. This is the part where I would like us to each share something that is
Hmm.
currently bringing us joy. So, Lindsay, is there something that is sparking joy for you?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that. I think for me right now, it is my espresso machine.
Ooh.
Yeah, we were lucky enough to be in Italy over the summer, and when we came back, I was like, "Oh my god, our coffee is horrible. Like, this is undrinkable. We cannot I will not tolerate this." So we got an espresso machine, and actually, I don't know, have you been up to Camden at all, Maine?
Yes, I
Yeah.
love
Do you know
Camden.
Zoot Coffee?
Yes, I've been there.
So, like, we discovered this Zoot Coffee when we were up there, and so now we order it from Maine. We put that in the
Nice.
espresso machine, and it is pure joy in the morning. I mean, it is just it's delicious. It's my morning ritual of I drink that
Mm,
and I play my New York Times word games, and I ease into the day.
that's
Yeah,
lovely. I love a morning ritual.
yeah.
My share, I just went for a walk, a cute little walk right before we met here today, and I ran into my neighbor, Don, and he's so cute. He's this little old guy. He's over 80, and he is out there doing a damn thing. It is cold outside. It is like 35 degrees. The real feel is 28 degrees, and I have crossed paths with him twice this week on a walk. He is a tough old bitch, and I love it.
Mm.
And we were just trading, like, stories about how we keep warm and, like, pointing out our LL Bean, like, "Yeah, my coat is LL Bean and my shoes are LL Bean." And I just love this guy. He is still living, he lost his wife, he's a widow, and he just keeps doing, and he is currently writing his biography.
Oh, very
Yeah,
cool.
and so he and I have talked about that because I'm writing a memoir and he's writing this biography and he's sharing it with his family, and it's really dear. And so we talk whenever we see each other, we talk about writing and what we're writing. And I've shared some books with him and some resources and
Mm.
stuff. And I just think he's a really cool guy. And seeing him out there in the elements, I was like, Don, you're cool. I like you.
I love that. I love unexpected positive encounters like that, right? And I think that's like a good reminder to be open, and even when you're not feeling like it, or when I'm not feeling like push myself to like get out there in the world, because yeah, you come across these people and you have a cute little interaction and you're like, oh, that was nice. And if I had stayed curled in my bed like I wanted to, I would not have had that interaction. So
I totally agree.
yeah.
Yeah. I've spent a lot of time being closed off, and it's nice not to be.
Mhm. Agreed.
Lindsay, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you sharing. I hope that anyone listening has found this helpful, has answered some questions. It's maybe opened some new questions, but I'm so glad that we could share this with other people. And thank you for joining me.
My
And
pleasure.
I want to thank anybody who's still listening. If you like what you heard, please subscribe. Please tell your friends. Would love for this to reach other people too, especially if you found it helpful. Until next time, this is your gal pal Sal, and you are listening to Chin Hairs and F Bombs. Thank you.